I guess it's all good.
Okay. Are we rolling?
It is recording already.
Awesome. Okay, I'll start the timer thing, and then we can figure out what we do when it goes off. So I have no idea what you want to talk about.
Yeah, I guess the best thing to do is start with an introduction.
Okay.
I'm going to try to introduce you,
Please.
and then we'll see if you can add anything to it.
All right.
So for a while now, I've wanted to do a series with my mentors. Now, Aaron here is the same age as me, basically. But he's one of the three people that I don't think I've ever told you this, but one of the three people that I consider one of my design mentors. And specifically, graphic design is what I learned from Aaron from as young an age as maybe 16, possibly. I started getting tips on how to use Photoshop and how to kind of control the hierarchy of information. And then later when I got into university, I'd call them up and ask for like pre-press questions, how to prep my files to send to a printer, and you know, how to use spot colors and full floods and stuff like that. So Aaron was always kind of like at least 2 years ahead of me at any of the stages. Aaron, could you quickly give an introduction to yourself?
Sure. So my name is Aaron Shinn, and I guess at this point, I mean, I'm a designer, but whenever I say I'm a designer, people say, well, what kind of design do you do? And answering that question is difficult. Lately, I've been saying that I'm a product designer, because I think that's the only thing that I can come up with that's appropriately broad, because I'm a generalist. And you know me primarily as a graphic designer, which is the way I started my career and the way that I learned about design. But as I've kind of been practicing for the last, I don't even know, 15 years now or something, I've gone from I've gone through so many different disciplines now that I can't claim to specialize in anything. And I tend to design things as systems or ecosystems, rather than as kind of like individual artifacts or single elements that would live within somebody else's system. So I tend to be more of a system designer, I guess.
How did you branch out from graphic design?
I think I was always, well, I mean, there are two answers to that. One of them is I just have a kind of predisposition to always want to try something that I don't know how to do. In a kind of like, not necessarily a fake it till you make it kind of way, but more of a just, play, just experiment and press all the buttons and see what happens kind of way. And so I've always wanted to do that, and that's how I got into graphic design as a teenager, just with a pirated copy of Photoshop, because I saw stuff that I liked and I wanted to emulate that, and I just kind of just mashed buttons until I started to get the results I wanted. And that mindset, I think, kind of propelled me forward into trying lots of other stuff. So once I went to, I went to design school, dropped out, started a kind of like design, I called it a design firm, but it was really just like me designing Rave flyers for money for the most part. Ended up going back to school, and then when I was back in school, I took everything from like motion graphics classes to sound design to like Maya classes, whatever. I was just playing, And then I ended up working in fashion. When I was in fashion, I started to become exposed to art direction as a practice, which is not design exactly, but it's a design adjacent visual practice. So I had the opportunity to play with that there and to experiment, and so started adding that to the repertoire. And then I ended up at IDEO after I left New York, and IDEO is the most cross-disciplinary design studio you could really imagine, where I worked on everything from software to control a brain implant, to kind of passenger experience for the airport security checkpoint of the future, to designing a brand of gourmet frozen food ingredients, and like the brand as well as the packaging as well as the contents of the packaging. So a little bit of everything. And so now I'm kind of at the point where, there are a few things that I haven't really played with. I guess, I've done a little bit of spatial design, a little bit of like product design, a little bit of industrial design, kind of, and it's a kind of a continuing process. And really, my next project is to design a tea room, and I'm not a architect, so it's just a kind of, I guess, process of continuing play and failing forward. Some people say, I guess, or like you experiment and trial everything and just see what happens. So yeah, I think that's it really. Like I've always been enough of a I've been screwing around enough, I guess, that that's kind of propelled my career, if you could call it that.
Selling yourself as a generalist is very hard, right?
Yeah, totally.
Like when someone says, when they say what kind of designer are you, they want you to say graphic design or fashion design or something very specific, right? But if I always say, when people say what do you design, I like to say everything. But I know that's like not what they want to hear, and it's really hard to actually it's hard to get work that way.
Definitely. Definitely.
What kinds of things do you think IDEO has done that has allowed them to be so general, and what kinds of things have you done?
So two answers, because IDEO's story is highly particular, and then my story is kind of a separate thing. All of my meaningful projects have come by referral. So in terms of my own work, I've only ever been, referred to somebody for something, for like a specific thing. Like, when I left IDEO, I had one public project that was actually shareable, and somebody saw it and they hired me to do a similar thing. In this case, it was a storytelling for future technology kind of thing in video form. So it was like, basically like film production, which I also have no business working in. I mean, I'm not trained in any way, but I just play with it. So like the referrals are always the thing that will, that I think give you the meaningful projects. I'm currently working on a new social network for fine artists, particularly a professional social network for fine artists. That's not, it's not a personal project. I'm an employee, and that's kind of an ongoing thing. And that also came through a referral from somebody that I worked with on a particularly hairy UX kind of like, product strategy thing. And, so the breadth, I think, is in, getting yourself to the point where you know enough to be hired, and then making your clients happy, and then they'll tell people. So I mean, personally, that's been my story. And frankly, I think the marketing yourself, I mean, I'm terrible at it. I've always been terrible at it. Even maintaining a website is too much trouble for me, even with like Cargo or Squarespace or all these like amazing platforms that make it really easy. I am always so focused on the next thing that I'm building that I never take a step back and document and make case studies. I could do much better.
Some of that's hard to do in retrospect too.
Yeah, sure, totally. And I mean, it's you have to, honestly, I think that really it'd be great to hire somebody else to do that. Honestly, like somebody who's like, a good storyteller and who like, knows what success looks like and, will kind of tease out the details. But, I also just don't have time to even think about that. So,
the Kimochi laser cut stencil video, video of the process of that album cover design process. I think that's a pretty effective portfolio piece,
Yeah, I'd love to do more of that, but that one has a funny story because I actually made that for an award submission, which I did not get. I think, I don't know, it was like maybe it was the AIGA 30 under 30 kind of thing, so this was back when I was under 30. I made that video to like basically it was for something else, a different award. Anyway, but I was submitting to an award, and video submissions were allowed, so I just submitted that as my project documentation. Yeah, and it was fun to make that, but I was highly motivated for this one purpose, And the funny thing is, they ended up featuring the video and putting it like in a featured gallery on the website, but they didn't give me the award for the project. And I was like, well, maybe they didn't like the album artwork. Right. But so anyway, so the marketing side, I think, is it's funny. Titles like, you know, fashion designer, graphic designer, whatever, are very convenient for employers. They're very convenient for people to hire you, because it allows them to draw a circle around the responsibilities they should give you, and it's a shortcut. It helps people to, like, you know, to wrap their head around what they could pay, what kind of value exchange they could have with you. And naturally, when you are in a more kind of like general position, you know, I guess design generalists are much more common in Europe than they are in the States. But when you're a generalist, you have to actually like evaluate people's skills. You have to actually engage with them and like really look at their work, and, you know, kind of have, you know, there's a cognitive load involved. So it's easier for everybody if you just say, oh, I'm an X designer, like as in X is fashion, X is blah, blah, blah. That makes it easier for people, but it also is, you know, it's limiting. And, you know, people will start to ask you, if you do pigeonhole yourself, people will say, oh, well, you're a fashion designer, why are you designing, you know, coffee accessories? Or, you know, you're a product designer, why are you making a typeface, you know? Whereas if you're just, you know, if you're just interdisciplinary, there's less cognitive dissonance. So the IDEO question that you had about, you know, how does IDEO have the permission to be so multidisciplinary? There are historical reasons for that. I think the big thing, like, just to put IDEO in context, IDEO's been around for, I don't know, almost 40 years. It could be closer to 30 something, but, you know, I'm not an authority on the company, even though I worked there for a while. They started out as a product design shop, so very much like, you know, company would come to them and say, okay, we have an idea for a product, or we have a business need for you to make this thing, and then they would do everything from like studying how people would use the product, you know, like with user interviews in context, you know, research, to prototyping, to the finished design of the thing, to even like the engineering and manufacturing support for that. So, you know, very much what is now a traditional product design service. And one of the things that IDEO pioneered, and by no means exclusively, but did very well in a commercial setting, is one of the kind of early players to do so, was to basically kind of come up with an integrated process for design research and strategy that had no presupposed outcome. So basically, like, you know, the process that IDEO tends to follow is to, you know, start with research, and then to take that research and synthesize it into insights and opportunities. And all of this is kind of, you know, all of these terms are of course very loaded, and they mean slightly different things than than the dictionary definitions of the word. So then once you have your insights and opportunities, then you can move on to the, you know, onto the sort of like, oh my god, I can't believe I'm blanking on this word. But basically, you know, you move on to sort of prototyping design options, and then eventually, you know, once you've filtered down, you know, to a smaller number of options, then, you know, you start to do higher level expression. But the thing about that process, the beauty of it, is that it doesn't have any disciplinary boundaries. It's a process of thinking and a process of practice. It's not a process that's devoted to making just a building or just a garment or just a brand. You could use it for any of those things. And clients also, you know, became, you know, clients eventually started asking IDEO to only do the first half of the process. So essentially like acting as a research and strategy firm and not acting as a design firm. So either of those offerings are equally relevant, and both of them are, you know, just at the core transdisciplinary. Because IDEO is a big enough company to have subject matter experts from all different disciplines, you know, you can build a project team with experts of any kind. So, you know, I would be responsible for communication design, which, you know, was a combination of like brand and strategy and messaging and visual design. And then, I might be paired with a human factors researcher who had an anthropology background, and I might also be paired with, if, for example, we're working on a space, somebody with an architecture background. So, IDEO likes to say that they hire T-shaped people with the, capital T, with the crossbar on the T representing a breadth of interests, and the vertical of the T representing depth in one particular subject matter or one particular discipline. So, essentially, IDEO's interdisciplinary offering comes from their having talented people from all different stripes that they can then put together based on project needs.
When a client goes to a company like that, because there's no definite outcome, I would imagine most clients are looking for a definite outcome. We want you to give us a logo, right? What kind of client is brave enough to go with that kind of process?
Well, so on my scale, when I'm operating as a design consultant on my own, and I'm not working with an IDEO or a big agency, my briefs are very tactical. So when I am recommended for a project, there's usually a very specific outcome. And, maybe it's an app, or maybe it's a brand, or maybe it's this or that, but the brief is always quite, it's quite specific. And this is a factor of the size of the business that you're working with. It's a very rare and typically a very large company that can afford to spend lots of money on speculative design explorations. I would say 9 out of 10 projects I did at IDEO were of that nature, were more speculative and more kind of future oriented, rather than necessarily about meeting an immediate market need. We need a logo. Boom, let's just make a logo.
Is that generally coming out of a R&D budget?
Well, I couldn't speak to how the clients are financing the projects, but there are only a few companies in the nation or in the world that can afford to spend 6 figures on something that doesn't necessarily result in a tangible return on investment. But the work that we did, or that I was involved in, that I'm sure IDEO continues to do, creates value as a kind of, trade secret is not really the right word, but as a way of building organizational intelligence. When you think about the future in a very human-centered way with a lot of research rigor, I think that you have the ability to see around corners in a way that a more kind of market-focused competitor won't. Because if you're just being led by the market, where things get, if it's electronics, you get bigger features, smaller package, smaller price tag, right? And it's just always a race to the bottom with more features, right? Witness the smartphone wars of everybody basically trying to make a cheaper iPhone that is better than the iPhone in one way or another. Everybody's still just looking at the iPhone. Nobody's really thinking about what a smartphone could do in a way that that nobody is really doing currently, in a way that user behavior that there's no behavior for,
especially beyond form factor.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Because the thing is, if you study an existing product, you get an existing answer. If you study behavior outside of a product, then you have the opportunity to come up with an answer that nobody's ever thought of yet.
That's very quotable.
It's probably not mine, but
It's great. Let's do something more fun.
Okay.
More relaxing. First of all, I want to get your definition of design.
Oh God. Design, design is funny because it's people think of it as a verb and a noun, and I think the word as a noun, it's almost meaningless, and I think it's very meaningful as a verb, but it's also so general that people don't think about it as a root verb. So, design at its core is about, it's about making plans. If you look it up in a dictionary, design is essentially like a plan, but for a designer, what is the practice? What is the thing that you're doing? Essentially, you're taking a set of criteria or constraints, and you are, through a process of, meaningful thought and, and strategy and whatever else is part of your process, through a process, you're turning those criteria into some sort of an outcome, something new that's being generated. And it could be like if you design clothing, it could be like you are given a creative direction and a bunch of constraints in the form of you're going to use these materials and colors and this is your price point, and then and of course the thing that I didn't mention, which is so foolish, is imagination. Because so much of design is to imagine things and then express them somehow in a way that they can then be used by other people. I don't know. I mean, design is a really it's so hard to generalize because of the difference in process and the difference in outcome. Because some people design organizations, some people design services, some people design businesses, and sometimes the outcome is very, very far away from an object that you can hold or something that you can regard with your eyes. So, I think that it's broad enough that it's very difficult to generalize about without just saying it's a process of constraint, creation, and then expression.
I once had a conversation with Iwatani-san, who was the designer of Pac-Man, and his statement was a designer should design his life. His or her life, I suppose. But what have you done, or have you designed your life?
Oh, wow. I mean, I've always kind of, like, that statement really appeals to me, design your life. Because it I think that you could argue that in the act of design, in the best case, this is not always going to happen, but in the act of design, there's a kind of heightened consciousness, like a kind of, kind of like hyper acuity in a way, and which is, like I'm sure you're aware of like the concept of the flow state or the psychology of the flow state. And that attention, that quality of mind is, I think, a really beautiful thing, and I think that's something that, that kind of, that creativity within constraints, that kind of, almost maybe omniscience, feeling of omniscience, I think is one of the things that like keeps me engaged in design. It's one of the things that makes me want to continue playing in it. Designing my life, though, feels like a huge undertaking in a way, because I think that so much of our lives are, we exist in a community and in a location and in a political climate and a cultural context and all of these things that we don't necessarily get to choose. And also, we have our, the kind of like the internal divisions between our conscious behavior and our unconscious behavior. I mean, like, we have in the background this collection of vinyl records, which I've been compulsively collecting since I was a teenager. And, I would almost argue that this is very much a non-designed behavior. This is a compulsion. Mm. And so, in a way, I love the idea of it, but I also am intimidated at the level of cold, in a way, of analytical precision that I would have to bring to my life in order to really design all of it. Mm. But nonetheless, I think that there are aspects of designing your life which are, creativity and problem solving. Like, like how can I have better quality of life? Like my wife and I go through this process a lot, like thinking about, okay, where's my time going? And what am I putting time into that's not giving me anything back? And what are the things that my life lacks? And how can I remove time from the unrewarding things and give time to rewarding things? Time is my basic currency now, unfortunately. But like that, that process of design always happens. This is why I'm a climber now instead of working out at a gym, because there's a climbing gym very close by, and it's delightful mentally, and also it's very good for my body. So, it's like this great coincidence of factors, both within and without my control, that allows me to sort of like, not drive all over town and not engage in, like I don't have to like lift weights and count reps. I don't have to do that now because I have, a sort of a different way to satisfy the same needs that's more delightful to me. Likewise, everything from like, how I eat to the way that I cook, and, the things that I buy versus the things that I don't buy, and like when I choose to get in the car and drive versus when I choose to mail order something. Mm-hmm. Like all of these, I guess, are design decisions in a way. But it's, there is a point at which you kind of run out of cognitive energy to analyze everything and make informed decisions and really live your life as if you are designing it all the time. Because I certainly have fatigue. And at some point, I just want to like fall apart on the couch and just make no decisions.
Do you, what, if any, relationship is there between Zen and design?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think there's probably, of course we can have this conversation because we've had lots of conversations about Zen, and we have a kind of a mutual, at least I think, a mutual understanding about what Zen is. And, I don't know if your viewers necessarily
Maybe
will.
Not.
But,
sorry.
Well, no, but let's talk about it anyway, because I think it's interesting.
Because I've been thinking about that for, I don't know, 10 years or something. Like, what relationship is there or not? Because at least on the very surface level, it seems that design is about discrimination. I like this and I don't like that. Mm-hmm. Or this is better than that, right? Mm-hmm. And kind of the core of the surface of Zen anyways is like non-discrimination, non-dual mind, right? So on the surface they look like they're heading in opposite directions, yet some intuition I have makes me feel that they're almost the same thing. And I know a lot of people who are into design who are also into Zen, whether or not it's, Japanese Zen or just generally have an affinity for, I can say a more Eastern cosmological perspective.
Right. Yeah. I mean, when I was a very young child, my mother was a Tibetan Buddhist, so I was exposed to Buddhism throughout, my early childhood, much more so than, I was also exposed to Christianity, but not as much because, my immediate family was not practicing or going to church. So it didn't take me very long to get exposed to Zen, and I don't think that there is a direct connection between. I don't think there's any more direct connection between Zen and design as there is between Zen and cooking, or Zen and housekeeping, or Zen and child rearing. I think Zen is a quality of mind, or a philosophical outlook, or a practice of being. And I think that it can be expressed in design, and I think that it can. I think that design can be a Zen practice, but I don't think design is inherently Zen. I don't think design, because design, of course, when we talk about design, we have to include all the bad design. All of it. Everything from, like, fast food restaurant menus to strip club logos to, not that there aren't good examples of those things, but they're frequently very, they're hardly artifacts of high contemplation for most people. So I don't think that there's necessarily, a kind of I think it's more that, one can encompass the other rather than that one inherently has it or doesn't.
So I suppose to me the reason why I feel they're connected is because I'm a designer.
Yeah.
Right? If I was a cook, then I'd be like, I just feel that Zen is so related to cooking.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what's that book that I've never read, but is so famous, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance? I mean, I think you can if you are a practitioner or an acolyte of Zen, or whatever, whatever the right term is, if you practice Zen, life is Zen, whatever human endeavor you're involved in.
Right. In fact, no thing you do would be outside of Zen.
No, I mean ideally, right? I mean, that's the kind of, I guess, what you strive for is that there is no inside and outside after a certain point. It's just you're just in it. But I wonder though, I don't sit in meditation for the most part, and I don't have a kind of a meditative practice or a spiritual practice that I engage in regularly. So,
other than climbing.
Well, I mean, if you could call that. I mean, it's not exactly focused.
You're not focused when you climb?
Well, not on the metaphysical.
Oh.
So I love the idea of life being suffused by kind of Zen awareness, but also not cultivating it in any way probably just makes it just makes me a Philistine.
When you have some kind of satori or experience like that, the experience is basically that it was all bullshit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean,
that like every normal thing was already that thing you were looking for.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It was right in front of your face the whole time.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, that's the kind of like magic of Zen instruction is that there are a million paths or a million things, and you can say, oh no, this is not the true path, this other thing is the true path, or whatever. But a teacher will tell you what you need to hear to get you to the realization. And then once you have the realization, it doesn't matter how you got there.
Right.
It's similar to my wife's mother is a midwife. And so I've learned a lot about how babies are born. And I mean, of course, not in the textbook sense, but in the reality of what's happening in the hospital. And, when you're pregnant, you make a birth plan. And the idea is to follow the birth plan. But biology has its own agenda. And the important part is to have the baby be born. And this is a similar process for for Zen awakening, right?
What would be advice you would give to a young designer?
I think everything that I've ever done that has been beneficial for me in my career has been something that I've done out of passion. Something that I was not, I've never done work that people cared about if I was just doing it out of obligation. I think obligation is the enemy of creative play, in a way. And so I didn't aspire to be a certain kind of designer or to have a certain status or to, and I'm thinking about the very early stages of my career when I designed flyers for raves, or when I did, when I just designed stuff that, I did almost more illustration than design. I didn't have a very specific purpose for any of it, and all of it was just driven by my own curiosity and my own hunger to make something that had a certain aesthetic that I could imagine, but that I had to make it in order to be able to see it. And I think of that as work that comes from a place of passion versus obligation. And so I really believe that if you are attuned to your passion and you can express that, then everything's going to be fine. You may need to change the context you're in because, maybe you're in a place where there's no support, there's no clients, there's no industry for the kind of designer that you need to be. But if you can express your passion, you will be able to take that expression to somebody who, to a different context, and to find the work and to find the career. I mean, maybe you want to design avant-garde menswear, but you live in Vietnam and there's no market for it, maybe. But, if you can do an amazing job of illustrating it and making sample garments and whatever, then you go to Paris and then there's market for avant-garde menswear there, or maybe Tokyo, or maybe whatever. I mean, we live in a global society now, and talent doesn't necessarily have boundaries. So it's just a question of being able to force yourself to express the talent, you know, and to do things that you authentically care about.
Your early Rave flyer work, especially that long-running series of ones where you used metallic inks for Bang.
The crowbar flyers, yeah.
That's like kind of a amazing singular body of work that should be collected into a book or something, or at least some kind of web gallery. But I guess you haven't done that.
No, no. It's so long ago. I mean, I had a surprise about 4 or 5 years ago. I found a box of all of those flyers. I still have, you know, a couple dozen of them. I think all of them. And you know, I had so much pleasure from just looking at those and remembering everything that went into them. And that was a really amazing assignment because I was basically given a blank canvas and, you know, a decent budget, and the client just believed in my vision and said, do whatever you want. Just once a month, make something cool. And, you know, I got to just experiment. I got to play. And it was not, you know, they didn't fight me for approval. I mean, you know, the economy was great, so they knew people would come anyway. So the pressure was really off me to, you know, to do anything that was very tactical and that had like measurable effects. So it was a really lovely period, and a lot of the work that I did then was, you know, kind of a elaborately decorative style that, you know, it was influenced by a lot of other elaborately decorative graphic designers. Yeah, I had so much fun with all of that. Yeah, that was wonderful. When it comes to, like, you know, doing trying to collect a little bit more of the history and kind of put it somewhere, I mean, I would love to do that, but it's going to be hard. You know, I'll kind of have to stop what I'm doing for a while. I know some people who are far more successful than I do, or than I am. A photographer in particular, I know, has a staff archivist, and I'm unbelievably jealous of this. That, like, you know, that this guy actually has the means to hire somebody to just, you know, catalog and index and keep his work accessible, even if it's private. Just having a good private archive is a big deal, because I mean, once you're, you know, 15, 20 years in, you know, you forget half the stuff you made.
Do you have the digital files for any of those? I
have digital files for everything, but they're made in an obsolete piece of software.
Freehand?
Yeah. And, you know, you still can't, I'm pretty sure, you can still, there's still one running version of Freehand that you can run under modern Mac OS.
Share will import them?
And I'm pretty sure it'll import them. I'm not sure that I have, you know, non-corrupt copies of all the typefaces. You know, but at some point I really should go through and try to rescue all those files and output them to PDF, just so that I have them in a form where I can, you know, touch them again.
But way back, I remember some kind of random meeting between you and, I don't, it was one of your friends in Chicago, and they were like, oh, you should put these online or something like that, and you're like, well, the problem with this series is you really have to photograph it. You can't use the digital file because like it's using metallic inks and stuff, and it's just not going to come out.
It doesn't look right, yeah.
Correct. So even, you know, before that box of flyers gets burned in a fire somehow, you know, at least photographing them.
Yeah, I should. I've done a very shitty job of it at one point. Like, when I found that box, I just, like, put them on top of a box and just took a shot of each of them. It's like a cardboard in the background. It's terrible, but at least there's, like, a little bit of documentation. But I will do it properly at some point.
I lost lots of my strongest game work, like very hands-on technical stuff, which would be almost impossible. Like, other than making some kind of elaborate video with gameplay and voiceover describing what's happening, it'd be really hard for like any random person to look at it and know what the meaning was, like why it's good.
That's hard.
But you know, just like code of like input filtering for Wii devices and for mice, and for like where the threshold of when you stop collecting the signal is, and what does that mean. Like, it was all done in some proprietary thing that was made just for that game, and you know, I would have loved to have that somehow, but but even that company doesn't even exist anymore. Right?
Right.
They went out of business. So,
Right.
you know, there's. If I had an advice for a young designer, it would be like to do an okay job of documenting your work as you go. But at the same time, I mean, it's not like you're not going to make better work in the future too.
Yeah, sure. But it's it's good to not to find a way to be able to return to your previous things.
Yeah,
absolutely. Always back up your files.
Oh man,
always back up your files.
Yeah. Do you know about that?
What?
Do you know about? No, you don't know about that.
I guess not.
These guys don't know about it either. But basically, there's been like a big hiatus in content for DX Mag.
Okay.
And partially that's because I had about 3 video interviews like almost ready to publish, and then I only had them on one hard drive, and that hard drive fell and became unrecoverable. And it wasn't only that, but also like a couple years of photos of my son and stuff like that. Kind of, buying an extra hard drive seems like a big expense up front sometimes, but I would have paid thousands of dollars to retrieve that stuff. So.
Data is priceless.
Yeah.
When it's yours.
Yeah.
I mean, like if you just have a bunch of pirated movies and crap, like who cares?
Right.
You can download that again on BitTorrent. But, if it's your stuff, get a RAID or something, or like use Dropbox or Backblaze or whatever. Like just have a backup.
Yeah. I've been like shy of using Backblaze or Dropbox just because of internet speeds in Vietnam are not always great.
Yeah.
So, if I was someplace where it was quite robust, I suppose I would be more serious about off-site backups.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, everybody has a different strategy. I have a photographer friend that I admire very much who, every time he does a shoot, he buys 2 bare hard drives. And he has 2 hard drive docks on his desk. He does the shoot, he pops in the drives, dumps everything to both drives, pops them out, puts them back in the box he bought them in, puts them on a shelf.
Wow.
He's got a cabinet full of drives, and that's,
that's professionalism.
That is professionalism. It's rigorous, it's expensive, but that cost is wrapped in the cost of his cost of doing business. I mean, he is using his client fees to fund that, and there's no reason that we all shouldn't be that rigorous with our backup. I mean,
yes, our client fees are smaller.
Well, raise your client fees.
How do you raise your client? Maybe that's a piece of advice. Like, how do you price yourself? Not your specific pricing,
but
generally, how would you price? Go about pricing and.
So pricing is a black art. It is full of mystery, and it is mysterious to everybody. But essentially, like the general principle is keep pushing your fees up until things start to break down horribly. And generally, if you are good and if you have the relevant experience, you can continue to push them up until almost without limit. The thing is, you won't necessarily know when somebody passes on you because you're too expensive or not. It might not tell you. But as long as you have a lot of inquiries, a lot of people asking you for your time, the more that you charge, the less busy you are, and the more that you charge, ideally, the quality of your work, the quality of your attention, the quality of your life goes up. So, but of course, this is very different for a designer working on assignment as a freelancer or a consultant versus a designer working within a salaried kind of corporate position. I believe. So there are a couple of pieces of advice. I'd say that for a salaried designer, every time you change jobs, you have an opportunity to try to double your salary. You might as well, just ask, see what happens. Not because, you are mercenary and evil and greedy, but because you don't know what you're worth. And I think that's generally the case for designers. As design starts to be seen more and more as a kind of core practice of companies that make products for people, designers may be kind of operating in this kind of like in the dark about how much value they're giving. And you might ask a company for a salary that actually puts you in a position of lower responsibility than you should have. So, I got a very good piece of advice once when somebody told me that when you tell them how much it's going to cost, if you don't feel sick, you're not asking for enough. And if they don't flinch when they see the number's not high enough. Like it should be, if you want to negotiate from a position of strength, you have to start where a compromise will still be a good solution. Whereas if you start with the lowest number because you believe you're competing by having low prices, well, when somebody asks you for less, there's nowhere for you to go without making sacrifices that can make your life hard.
So, are you familiar with any of those kind of freelance websites? Especially, I guess there's one, Fiverr or something, where I don't know what its name is, but like it's kind of a race to the bottom in terms of pricing, or like you're even working on spec, and it's like kind of a competition. I'm aware of these, and I don't believe any designer should ever do work on spec, ever. Unless you have so much to gain and nothing to lose. For example, let's say you have no living expenses, no working expenses, like basically you have unlimited time and your time costs you nothing and there's nothing else you'd rather be doing and you have no experience, sure, do some stuff for free, like just get it out there. But if you're a professional and somebody is going to make money off of your work, good Lord, do not give it to them for free. And don't do it as a competition, because that's just a way of exploiting people who don't know how to sell their talent. I find Fiverr and 99 Designs and all those things like infinitely depressing. Not because that I think that there's no talent there, not because I think that that it is like destroying design or anything like that, or ruining the market. Far from it. I just think that the real tragedy is that there are probably some very good designers and very good artists that are toiling away in those, digital sweatshops who are worth more and should be working in environments that, acknowledge their value instead of treating them as like, I don't know, like contestants in a talent show where the prize is $5. Mm-hmm. It's sad. If the prize was $500,000, would that be different?
I'd say so, yeah. For example, the architecture world has the architecture world at its at the very, very high levels is sometimes prize driven for municipal projects, where multiple firms will spend a lot of money submitting basically building speculative designs in order to win the commission to build a real building. And that's just, at that level, sure, why not? But this is also something that, similar to the way pitch work is done in advertising, this is figured into the cost of doing business. The organization can absorb that expense, and people are being paid a living wage, hopefully, to do that work. So it's all kind of, I think we have to be very careful not to universalize, the advice of never do spec work, I guess, because if you are in an organization that's, their business model is predicated on it, then, I suppose that's okay for your business. But the thing that I feel like is the most important the place where I have to be very decisive is when it comes down to the individual designer or the freelancer. If you're not a little bit of a if you don't have the sort of business savvy or the restraint to kind of hold back, you might just give away all your time and energy to people who will take advantage of you. And I've had that happen to me, and everybody I know has had that happen to them. And I think you have to really dig in and draw a line in the sand. I will do this much without a contract, and then everything else afterwards has to be billed according to whatever terms you set up.
When you get into a funk or a slump or just feel uninspired, how do you pull yourself out of that?
I mean, you know, I think the first thing is to like, you know, like if let's say we're in the context of a project, right? You know, there's usually a kind of like beating your head against the wall process of like, you know, okay, I try to design it, and I never get to anything that I like, right? I think it helps to exhaust yourself in the beginning so that then you can be open to new ideas, right? And then how you get those new ideas is kind of up to you. Like sometimes for me, it's like flipping through old sketchbooks or looking at my old work, or sometimes it's, you know, going to the library, like, you know, just the wall over here of design books and flipping through those, or maybe it's doing something completely unrelated, like totally not at all related to the task at hand. Maybe you're designing a, you know, a logo or an object or something, and the thing to do is to go have a beautiful meal somewhere. You know, I mean, of course, I'm very food motivated, and you know, the experience of eating, the multisensory aspect of being in a restaurant that's inspiring, you know, that can make me think about things entirely differently. But I think a change of context and a change of environment can be really powerful.
What activity, you mentioned climbing before, what other activities do you do outside of your professional work? At all, I guess, but specifically things that are creative. What kind of creative things are you up to?
Oh, man. Well, I'm so busy right now that I don't have much time for my other creative pursuits. But probably the one that's been the most consistent and that has had the same amount of time with it as I've invested the same amount of time as I have in my design career is dance music. And that's, you know, all of this, for the most part, all of these records are dance music records. And I have a kind of, you know, insatiable hunger to kind of follow my interests and continue to explore the world of dance music. And so a lot of that is, you know, in sort of passionate research and exploration. And then, you know, the way that gets expressed is through DJing or through DJ mixes, or sometimes making re-edits, sometimes making original music, but I have less and less time for that, unfortunately. But you know, but music for me is a wonderful balance between the kind of conscious and the unconscious, right? There's the deliberacy of, you know, as a waking person, I want to listen to something like this, or, you know, kind of like knowing, like there's this one artist that I, you know, or this feeling that I want to have again. But then the way that music works on you, the way that music alters your mindset, is something deeply emotional and physical and kind of, you know, sort of a brainstem level thing. And I think that's a wonderful metaphor for you know, art making or for design or for anything, that there's always that mixture of the consciousness and the unconsciousness. And I think that, you know, like I rarely design without music. I rarely like work without music, and I find that, you know, music is a huge influence, a huge aesthetic influence on the work that I do in a way. You know, what I listen to, you know, affects the way I work and affects the kind of the outcomes of how I work, and, you know, and a little, you know, even decisions about, you know, like the aesthetics of something, you know, can be influenced by what I'm listening to. So, I mean, I think that's probably the biggest creative practice that I have that I have no professional interest in at all.
Mm. Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us today. And, you know, I always, when I watch other people's YouTube videos, they always end it by asking, like, hey, if you like this video, please subscribe, and they point somewhere,
mm-hmm.
like the button's here or something.
Yeah.
I've never done that. I don't know if it matters.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think it's good to tell people what you'd like them to do next.
All right.
Yeah.
What would I like them to do next?
Well, are you on YouTube?
Yeah, well, this will eventually be on YouTube.
Well,
yeah.
You should tell people to subscribe.
You should subscribe to this channel.
Do it. Awesome. Well, thank you, Thomas.
Yeah.
It's been fun.
Great. Thanks.
I can't wait to see how this whole thing turns out.